Hey guys, we're back to your favorite time of videos with Mrs. Sister. I'm going to go through your guys' notes for you on completing the square. There is an extra video in Classroom. If you have extra questions, please feel free to watch that as well. Okay. All right, so I have an equation here. Okay. And it says for us to solve this. I want to remind you as I'm working through the video, please feel free to pause as needed. Okay. All right, so if I were to take a look at this here, I would notice that this over here is a perfect square, and in that perfect square I have that 5 multiplies to 25 and 5 adds up to 10. So I have x plus 5 squared equals 49. That was our perfect square factoring rule. Okay. If I were to solve this, then I could get rid of that squared by square rooting. When I square root that there, I need to make sure and add my plus or minus. Okay. My squared goes away, so I'll have x plus 5. The square root of 49 is 7. So I need to use a positive 7 and a negative 7 here. Okay. So I'm going to have x plus 5 equals 7, or x plus 5 equals negative 7. Solve both of those. So x could equal 2, or x could equal negative 12. Okay. So there's 2 possible answers there of 2 or negative 12. Right? Okay, here's my next one. Solve x squared minus 6x plus 9 equals 32. Usually we we would get rid of this onto that other side, but for the sake of what we're doing today, we're going to pretend like we don't need to, okay? You'll see why later. If you notice, we need to look at what numbers multiply to make 9, the add to make negative 6. So here's our add and our multiply. 3 and 3, or negative 3 and negative 3. Since they are the same number, they are a perfect squared one again. Okay. So we're going to solve that. We're going to solve it the same way we did the other one. Sorry for the bouncing. I'm going to move that equal sign over so I have room for my plus or my minus. And I'm going to have x minus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 32. Okay. 32 is not a nice number, so I need to figure out what factors go into it. I know that 32 can be divided by 2, so I'm going to figure out my perfect square here. I have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Okay. When I pull those out, I have 1 pair, 2 pair. So I have 2 times 2 square root of 2, or 4 square root of 2. Okay. When I solve this, I need to make sure that we have a positive and a negative version of that. So I'm going to have x minus 3 equals 4 root 2. And x minus 3 equals negative 4 root 2. So I'm going to add my 3. And I'll come out with x equals 3 plus 4 root 2. Okay. It's ugly, and that's okay. It appears that we could also, according to the book in this one, estimate it. If it tells you it's okay to estimate it, this comes out to 8.7. Okay. On this one, I'm going to do the same thing, add my 3, and I'm going to end up with 3 minus 4 root 2, nice and ugly again. Or it is also about negative 2.7 if you were to throw those into your calculators. But here's your two answers. Some are uglier than others. Okay. The nice thing about this, though, is that when we factored ugly numbers, we did not, it wasn't easy for us to get an answer. So this method that we're going to talk about today gives you an opportunity to get an answer even if the problem is ugly. All right, so this method is called completing the square. What you do is you try to make your quadratic into a perfect square. So like we did above, this perfect square piece, that's our goal, okay? Remember, this is what your quadratic looks like, x squared plus bx plus c. And we need to know that because we need to know what pieces we're going to use for our completing the square. So step one, we need to take b and we need to find half of it or divide it by 2. Remember, b is the letter next to your x. Okay. Step 2, you are going to square whatever b divided by 2 is. Okay. And that squared is what would be added on to the end of our x squared and our x piece to create our perfect square. Okay. All right, so what we're doing is we're taking our b divided by 2 piece and squaring it here so that we have x plus b divided by 2 in parentheses. Okay. Like above here, if I have a negative on the x value, totally fine. I would just end up with a negative here. So if you have a negative here, you'll end up with a negative here. Okay, that pencil mark shows you an option. All right. Okay, so let's look at how this works. So we can just figure out how to find that value of c, how to fill this piece in right here. Okay, this is the piece we're kind of trying to fill in. So find the value of c that makes this a perfect square and then write it. So I'm going to have x squared plus 12x plus c. That c is the part I need to fill in. So let's look at our directions. First one says, I'm going to erase this so I know that's what I'm filling in right here. Okay. Find half of b. So my b equals 12. Okay. If I want half of b, I'm going to have 6, right? The next thing I do is I need to square it. So I'm going to take this piece here and I'm going to square it, or square that 6. So I'll have a 36. And this piece is what goes right here. All right. Now, if we want to write it as a perfect square, we know that it would have just this here. This number that goes into your perfect square, as you can see up here, is just your b over 2, which is right there, and that is your 6. Okay, you just want that b over 2 piece, which is our 6. And this right here is now my perfect square that I need to solve. All right, so that's how you complete the square. So now let's talk about how we can complete the square in order to help us solve an equation. Okay. So it says to solve this by completing the square. Okay. When we complete a square with an equation, we actually want to have our x squared and our x pieces by themselves. We just want these two so we can make a square. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this 20 over here to the other side. So I'm going to have x squared plus x equals 20. I'm going to leave myself room because right here, that's where I want to put that piece we found on the last page. Okay, it's going to go there. So what I need to find first is my b, which is 8. And I need to find b over 2, which is going to be 4, right? And then I need to square it. So 4 squared is, here, I'll write the 4. Okay, 4 squared is 16. You can put that in your calculator or you might know it. So this 16 piece is what I'm going to put right there in my blank. If I add a 16 to this side of my equation, I also need to add a 16 over here to the other side of my equation. Okay. So I'm going to end up with, let's write out our perfect square now. When we write it out, we want that b over 2 piece, so that 4. And over here, I have 20 plus 16, or 36. Now I have an equation set up that I can go ahead and solve. Okay? So in order to get rid of a squared, I can square root both sides. When I square root, I need to add my plus or minus. So I'm going to have x plus 4 equals plus or minus, the square root of 36 is 6. So I can do an x plus 4 equals 6, or an x plus 4 equals negative 6, and solve. So I'm going to move my 4. I'm going to move my 4 again. Okay, and these now are the two answers to my problem. Okay. Completing the square is really helpful when you do not have something that can factor easy. You have something pretty ugly. One of the things completing the square can be used for is when you have a coefficient in front. So when you have a coefficient in front, we're going to go about this all of the same way, except this 2 cannot be here. All right, so what we're going to do is we are going to divide everything by 2 to get rid of that 2. All right, got blurry. Okay, so 2 divided by 2 is just 1. 5 divided by 2 is 5 over 2x. 3 divided by 2 is 3 over 2. 0 divided by 2 is 0. Then we go about doing our problem from above. So step 1, we want to get these 2 pieces by themselves. So I'm going to subtract that 3 halves from both sides. Remember when we work with these, because we're dividing by 2 and squaring, it really helps if we leave things in fractions. So you might need to push that fraction button on your calculator to make sure it stays that way, okay? All right, so we have our b, negative 5 over 2. The next thing we need to do is divide that in half, okay? Writing something as a divide by a divide really doesn't make sense. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to say that we need to divide this by 2, and I'm going to use my old fraction knowledge to do that. When I divide anything by 2, I flip this and multiply it instead. So I do the reciprocal. So that I can solve. So now I have negative 5 over 4, and that's going to be my b over 2. Now I need to take that 5 over 4, and I need to square it because that's the next step. Okay. When I square it, I'm squaring the top and the bottom. So -5 squared is 25. 4 squared is 16. And this is my squared answer. It is nice and ugly, but it's okay. So 25 over 16, if I add it to one side, it also needs to go on to the other side. Good thing we have smart calculators. Okay. Right here, this B number is the number I need in here. On your calculator, you can just put in -3 over 2 plus 25 over 16, math, frac, okay, and it comes out to 1/16. Now I can go about and start solving my problem. So I'm going to square root it and add a plus or minus. And I'm going to have x minus 5/4 equals plus or minus. The square root of 1 is just 1. The square root of 16 is just 4. No more square root there. You could end up with a square root answer, and that's okay. It's just going to get a little messy. Okay. So now I am going to set up my problem in the two different ways so that I can finish it. It's nice that my bottoms all still became fourth, so I can easily do this problem. Okay. If you are having a problem, you can throw that into your calculator and it'll help you out. If you're having a problem with fractions, use that math frac button to help you out as well. So this is going to reduce to 3 over 2. Okay, and let's take a look at what our other one's going to be. So I'm going to have x equals 4 over 4, which equals 1. So my two answers is that x could either equal 1 or 3 over 2. Okay. All right, you have an assignment in Google Classroom to work on. And if you have questions about this, you could try watching the other Completing the Square video. Okay. And just try it out.